Hello and welcome to the Home Assistant Podcast. This is episode number 63. Today we're talking with James. Hey, James.
Hey, afternoon, good morning, and good evening, and good night.
That's right, wherever you are. And as usual, we're joined with Phil. Hey, Phil.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So today we'll be talking about 0.106 and a whole bunch of other stuff. So let's get started.
This episode is sponsored by Home Assistant Cloud by Nabukasa. Easily and securely access your local Home Assistant instance remotely for a small monthly fee that also supports the Home Assistant project. Configuration is via the user interface, so no fiddling with router settings, SSL certificates, or any YAML.
So the Android app, it's got a bunch of updates. It's gotten a lot closer to iOS. So if you're not familiar with this, the Android app is the official Home Assistant app that we're talking about. And essentially that's been being worked on for last, I don't know, what do you say, 6 months or so, Phil?
Yeah, well, I think they sort of announced sort of April Fool's Day, sort of. By the way, we're having an official Android app, and since then they sort of took a hiatus, and they really went back and did the whole back-end sort of things into the Home Assistant and got the groundwork laid, and they did the whole like mobile app framework that, you know, even third parties can use. So I think, yeah, it's been a while, almost 12 months, I guess.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so I mean, they've been working through a lot of that, and essentially they're closing the gap between what iOS app can do and the Android app can do. Obviously, the iOS app has been around for a lot longer, so it's great to see that the Android users in the group are able to actually get a lot of that too. So the latest updates looks like they've got actionable notifications and battery sensors that are exposed to Home Assistant as well. So awesome.
Yeah, I've always been jealous of the iOS app as an Android user myself. I always hear, Rohan, you were like on the beta straight away, right? And you had all those cool features, and I was so jealous. So it's really cool to finally see some of that stuff coming over.
Yeah, it was nice because I didn't have to use 4 different apps that all talk to a Home Assistant. Just so Home Assistant can tell me where I am, or any of those kind of things, right? So I know Robbie and team worked pretty hard on that. So
I think feature parity is like really important as well. So this house is split. I'm a big Apple junkie. My partner, she uses Android, so I want the best experience for us both. And I've been doing a lot with actionable alerts with iOS and having some fun there. And it's nice to see that come through to the Android app.
Yeah, another one I saw was the ability for so Home Assistant can actually ask the Android phone, and I don't know if this is in iOS, I assume it is, where its current location is. So, for example, you know, you can have a little automation set up, you know, between these hours, check where the phone is every 5 minutes or something. Obviously, it would drain your battery, but I thought that was really cool. So if you wanted to do something like, if you're driving home and you know, between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. you're driving home, you can have Home Assistant ask your phone every minute where you are. So then maybe on the Lovelace dashboard, you would have, you know, your little icon traveling down, getting closer and closer to home. So really cool stuff that you can do there as well.
Yeah.
All right, 0.106 is out, and we have some cool new features. So Safe Mode, which was introduced in the last release, 0.105, is now even a bit better, I would say, in this release. So as of 0.106, Safe Mode will use a red color scheme, so you definitely know something is wrong. So Safe Mode is available for if you've stuffed something up in your config, maybe you've got a indentation wrong somewhere, or for example, you've just upgraded to 0.106 and there's a breaking change and Home Assistant isn't happy. Previously, you would have to, you know, Home Assistant just wouldn't boot, or there would be errors everywhere. Now, this new Safe Mode ensures that the Home Assistant front end is always available, and if there is a critical error for whatever reason, at least some form of UI is available to tell you where it's gone wrong. So this is a cool, very useful feature, and it sort of reminds me of anyone that's used to Windows 95 or Windows 98 having to, James, I'm sure you're used to this, having to press the F8 key a whole bunch of times to get into safe mode. Obviously, you wouldn't have to press the F8 key to get into safe mode, but yeah, really cool little nostalgic point back to those early Windows 95 days.
Yeah.
Have you hit it yet?
No, that definitely brings back memories. But so it's good too, if you ever have any issues and such, you don't necessarily need to open, especially if you're running it on a Raspberry Pi or something like that. You don't need to connect a monitor. You don't need to do all that stuff. You can just kind of log into the web UI and see what's wrong. So as they kind of work towards that 1.0, I think this will be something really neat in case something does go wrong, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
Have you hit safe mode yet?
I haven't.
Not yet.
We're really that good.
Yeah. It's saving grace. No, I think it's a great feature to help debug once you do encounter an issue.
Have you hit it yet?
Yes, yeah, I hit it last week. I was doing some config change, I think to MQTT, and I left a digit in somewhere and it shouldn't have been there, and fat keyed, the keyboard, and
of course
rebooted and found that.
Yeah. Next thing you know, boom, here you go. So it works. That's cool.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Also, there's a more info dialog for the people. So the person entity now, if you click them, can bring you more info on the person, including a map of where they are. So, which is super handy, but may also be a little bit creepy.
Yeah, I guess the info is already there in Home Assistant though, but always good to have your people on the little fingertips there. Just click them and they're there. Oh, that's where they are. Excellent.
That's right. Well, you can kind of always. It's more of a manual effort, right? Because let's say the iOS app, for example, give you their GPS coordinates. You'd have to plug them in or whatever, but I guess now this is automated, so that's nice.
Automations created via the interface now default to device automations. So if you're not familiar, and I must admit, I haven't even bothered trying to use the Home Assistant UI to create automations, but I did when I saw this. So it's a little bit more easier now to create automations in the UI now that they've just done this little tweak. So now, for example, you can go in and as you create your automation, it'll give you the device. So you might choose when a motion sensor is triggered or turns to on. You can then have, turn on this light. Instead of having to do service calls, like light.turn on and this entity ID or this device, it's all now using natural language, which I think is going to make just a little bit easier for new users trying to get started with Home Assistant.
Yeah.
Totally. I still love just ripping open some YAML and writing mine raw in an editor.
Definitely.
Through the UI, but
yeah, no, there's still value in this, so which is great to see. So scripts and scenes now can have custom icons, so you don't need to use customize.yaml for having those right now, I guess. So which is great.
I guess that's one I would have thought would have been really easy to do and would have been done ages ago. But I guess no one's really bothered to put a pull request in for it. But good to see it's there.
Yeah.
One we're always a big fan of is safety and safety sort of related stuff, and the Geo RSS platform is awesome for that. And so now, a bit of a mouthful, we've got the Global Disaster Alert and Coordination System, or GDAX, and that is also using the Geo RSS platform. And usually when we see providers added to this, they're usually localized. For example, New South Wales Rural Forest Service only applies to New South Wales, doesn't really apply to Canada. But this provider actually does a whole bunch of stuff for around the world. So you can get information for major droughts, earthquakes, floods, tropical cyclones, tsunamis, and volcanic activities as well. So really cool. Maybe they could even consider adding this as default. I reckon that's pretty cool to have in there.
Yeah, no, agreed. It's especially if you put in your location, whatever, it pulls it up from there. That'd be kind of cool.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're suffering from a few storms the last couple of weeks in the UK, mainly sort of heavy winds and rain, and it's causing a lot of floods. And when you shared the show notes, I hadn't come across this before, and drilling into it today, even I'm seeing storm warnings and flood warnings, and I think that's probably the same service that our Home Assistants use to tap into those flood warnings when they pop up on the screens. Definitely going to add that as an integration. Yeah,
and if you use the media service for your Amazon Echo or Google Home, whatever, you can push to talk, or sorry, not push to talk. You can TTS that too, right? To say, hey, there's something happening.
Yeah,
whatever.
I love that.
Yeah, which is always a huge fan of that. So Minecraft. If you're a fan of the game Minecraft, if you're running a local server, you can now integrate it with Home Assistant. So it'll tell you kind of the number of online players, the latency time, and the connection status, and they all come in as sensors. So that's kind of neat.
It just reminds me that this sort of stuff. Remember when Bitcoin and all that was really high, and there was like every week we were getting like a cryptocurrency, sort of cent like integration, like this sort of like stuff. It's like one of those random ones that, once again, like I'm guessing would have a pretty single point of use case, but I guess it just goes to show how powerful Home Assistant is. And yeah, of course, like if you want to have your lights a different color based on how many people are connected to your Minecraft server, then there it is. It's available.
Yeah. How the lights flash in celebration if you hit so many users or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Tato, however you want to pronounce it. They're a popular little air conditioning control unit. I think they were either a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo back in the day. But they've actually come out with a cool product, and they've got like water heaters now as well. And they're now officially supported in Home Assistant. And I guess this is going to really bridge into our breaking changes as well. But as part of this, there is a support for Tato multiple accounts. And to support that, the configuration UI has been completely overhauled. So if you're using this integration before you upgrade to 0.106, just check out the release notes. There is a whole bunch of YAML changes that you might have to upgrade for.
Also along the breaking changes line, so there's some features that are now restricted to admin users of Home Assistant. So this is great to see. So only folks with admin access will have the ability to change certain things like a theme or start and stop the Home Assistant service from the UI. So, which is good to see. So now that means we're getting to that point where that admin user's being able to, or the non-admin user, let's call it, has less privileged access than the admin user, which is typically what you want. And especially if you have it on a tablet or something like that, you want literally the least amount of ability to be able to do anything like that. So
the last thing you want is someone going in and hitting the config button from a tablet on the wall and shutting down everything, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So,
and the final breaking change, there's a whole bunch, so do check out the show notes. But the final one that we'll mention today, and I think this is for a very first world problem for the top 1%, is the Tesla scan interval has had to be increased. So it's now been increased to 11 minutes. It was previously 5 minutes. And the reason because of this was people found out that if you were polling your electric car for 5 minutes, every 5 minutes, the car actually wouldn't go to sleep and it would drain your battery a lot quicker. So if you are lucky enough, and Mr. Musk, we are still waiting for our free Teslas, so hit us up. We would advise you just to go in and check your config. If you have manually adjusted the scan interval for the Tesla integration, it is advisable that you at least bump it to at least 10 to 11 minutes, just so your car has the ability to go to sleep and save the battery.
Yeah, which is, it's a good thing we've got that going. Otherwise people's cars dying all over the place. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, I strongly am in support of, if anybody wants to send us a Tesla, we're more than happy to use that.
Yeah. We'll integrate it with Home Assistant and do a podcast episode on it. There you go.
That's right.
We can only but dream.
That's right. So James, let's talk about you a little bit. Why don't we just start with kind of how long you've been using Home Assistant and just home automation in general?
It's about 6 months I've been using Home Assistant. I skirted around it a few years back, so I've been probably messing around with automation and components like Raspberry Pis now for probably a decade or so. Really got into it when I got my first home, sort of 2014, and started off with the simple stuff, the lights and bits and pieces, and gradually it's just taken over, and I love it, completely love it. So great hobby. Initially I started off just with Python scripts running on Raspberry Pis to do stuff. One neat thing I kicked off was I had a projector screen that came out the ceiling, and the button for that was, I think it was like 433 megahertz Spectrum button, and I sniffed the button presses and was able to use a Raspberry Pi to resend those, so then I could drive some automation with my Logitech Harmony remote. So when I put it into movie mode, the projector would come on and the screen would come out the ceiling. And that really, for me, writing some software that made some changes physical changes in my world was just when I became completely blown over by home automation and electrical engineering and stuff. And since then, I've just loved it. Every week I'm messing around with something. I started off looking at home OpenHab. I did a reval of Home Assistant back then, and 3 years ago I think even tried Home Assistant, and I just didn't feel it was for me. Complete curveball, because I've had like Vera Plus, SmartThings, you name it. I've tried so many different gateways, and I could not be more comfortable and confident using Home Assistant. I wouldn't recommend anything else now.
What do you think would be the biggest selling point for you in using home? Like, you've obviously got all those bunch of comparisons. What's the biggest draw card that you've found to be the point of difference against them all?
I think the wide spectrum of integrations. For me, I don't tend to buy anything now that doesn't have some form of integration. I'll choose to buy something else now because it integrates better with Home Assistant or through some kind of mechanism. But I think the community as well. I think the Home Assistant community is solid, and you put something out there, people share it, like it, appreciate it, but also contribute to it. Like at work, we've got a big ethos in sharing, and I think when you start enjoying something as a hobby, it's really good to give back to the community, however simple or big something is. So watch this space, because I've got tons to share, and I really kicked it off over the holiday, sharing a few little bits that I've been working on. And I want to share articles and videos and stuff, but I don't want to regurge what's already out there. So I'm going to try and find some kind of format that works to share what I've been working on. And if I just look around the house now, there's plenty that I'm sure people would probably laugh me out of my home. But others might enjoy it too, right? So
yeah, well, as I said, we were talking just before we started recording today, and I was saying that I just love your Twitter feed. Like, there's some really good nuggets in there, and I was asking you about your bath sensor, and I'm really curious. So, because I originally it piqued my interest because you're just using a Xiaomi water leak sensor. And I'll let you explain. So what does this bath sensor you've somehow created do for you?
So this is like V4, V5 of the solution. So for me, I love a bath. I've got various injuries that I've occurred over many years, and a good bath, hot bath helps. And my first property I had, it was really slow to run. Like, it would take an hour to fill the bath up. So you'd go off and you'd cook dinner or you do something and you'd forget that it's running, and then suddenly you've got a flood, and everyone says, yeah, but your bath's got an overflow hole. Yeah, of course it does, but sometimes it doesn't drain quickly enough for the bath to prevent itself from flooding. So we're going back 2014, and I built a Tupperware container with a Raspberry Pi and an ultrasonic sensor to sense how deep the bath was, right? And it would just, I think even back then I was playing an MP3 on my Sonos speaker. I was doing something daft to remind me that the bath was running and it was getting a bit full. And over the years I've adapted this, and that Tupperware container didn't last very long at all. But I replaced it with a Z-Wave sensor, which had a cable water contact sensor, and I put a suction cup on that, and was just able to put it in the bath as and when I was running one. The trouble is, I was running a Z-Wave network just for that, and I brought it over to Home Assistant and was using the integration, and the reliability of the sensor was just really bad for me. It wasn't waking up to send the fact that it was wet, and then my automation wouldn't trigger and stuff. So I just had to tear it down, and every window and door in the house has got a Zigbee sensor on it. So I've got a really good mesh network going on with my lights and stuff. So it made sense to look down that route. And when it arrived and it had the flat back, and it just said to me, put a suction cup back on this, and it's perfect, right? So it sits on the side of the bath on the shower screen, and when I run a bath I just stick it in, and obviously when the contacts get water, it sends an automation, so it triggers depending on time of day and stuff. It will trigger on different speakers, but I just used a text to voice, text to speech service on my Sonos, and I do a push notification to my phone. So yeah, quite a simple one in relative terms. It's just the application, right? We've all got these sensors. We all stick them under a washing machine or a sink to tell us when there's a flood. But it's so simple. It's a beautiful design, I think, in terms of the Tupperware container where I first started to this. But it just goes to show if you think a little differently, you can apply all kinds of things to these sensors.
No, of course.
I use one in the shower, so I know when someone's in the shower to delay the lights turning off. Because that way you don't want to be in the bathroom and the lights turn off while you're in the shower. But that way at least it's. So
I've got a presence for shower bath. So I've got a humidity sensor, same brand above the shower head. And through sampling data over a couple of days, I could figure out what the humidity was when I was having a bath and when I was having a shower, regardless of whether the window was open or not and stuff. So that then is used for some automations. But yeah, I find the humidity a bit more reliable.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it gives you a little bit of a, especially if you're controlling the fan and stuff, it gives a bit of a cool off time too, right? So actually it's funny, one of the blogs that got me into home automation, the gentleman basically, he had it was a switch, it was a light switch with just a power switch with a humidity sensor in it. So the idea was when the humidity goes down to a certain level, then a fan just turns off automatically. Right. And to me, I was like, oh my God, that's genius. Right. Like I hadn't even thought of that kind of thing.
That's where you would put it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a ton of stuff you can do with that kind of stuff. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I use the trigger as well. So the fact that the bath sensor's wet to say that the bath's full. I keep it in when I'm running the bath actually, and once I'm in, because it's got the temperature sensor, so I'm getting a rough clue as how hot the bath is, which is quite nice.
Yeah,
but,
that's interesting.
It basically keeps the state active, so my lights don't dim. So for me, I'm a big audio and light fan, and every room, it started off with Hue with the lights, and then I got a sensor, and when you walk into the room, Hue would turn the lights on, great, and then like somebody turns the switch off. We all have this problem. And I found some really nice molds in the UK that go over our standard light socket. So I decided to put one of these molds. They're 3D printed molds. They're really nice, magnetic. The magnetic Hue cover clamps onto it, and it basically renders the old switch as static because you can't get to it to turn it off. And then I just use a remote for every room, so that if anyone does want to use the typical wall switch, there's a remote there to do it. And I moved over to my combi stick for my Zigbee network, so my Hue bridge isn't used anymore, and I lost all of that automation. And I didn't want to do it in the combi app. I'm using all automation for my rooms for lights and motion, and I've got other sensors too that give me alerts. But back to the bath is another signal to say the room is in active state, so that the lights don't just turn off when there's no motion, because we've all sat in the bath and had to wave regardless, crazy wave to get the lights back on.
So 2 questions on that then. First of all, for those Xiaomi water sensors, so you have them fully submersed in the water? So they don't have any...
Yes, yeah. Dip, with movement in the bath, it'll be uncovered. No problem at all. I wouldn't say they're submerged for any length of time, but say 45 minutes, an hour, they've been submerged, no problem.
Right.
I don't find the temperature updates regularly enough. Sometimes you have to nudge it with a button press, but I'm going to look at seeing if I can get into the config on the sensor and just see if I can get it to send that a little bit sooner.
Because I've noticed one thing because I recently moved over to a combi and decons as well, and you said that you didn't want to set it up in decons. I found that I have the Philips Hue dimmer, which is the remote I think you might be referring to, and I've linked that in decons, and when I pair it to a light, it actually assigns the button switches directly to the lights. So even if the Zigbee network is down, I believe, as long as the light bulbs and the remote are in range, they will control the lights. Okay. And it's actually a lot faster than going out through homes.
Try it out.
Oh, very cool.
Typically don't use them because I've got what I feel is a pretty solid motion now in my rooms.
Yep.
It's taken a long time to get there, but they're there for people that are just comfortable. Some friends come over and they completely they just hate it. So I've kind of kept things in the normal place for people to expect a light switch. I want to turn the lights on. I'll go over to the light switch and turn it on. But I've got my room timeout working perfectly now with various signals and triggers to say, right, the room's in use, don't turn off the lights. And this was a big problem for me with the hue sensors, because there was a delay between motion and then the lights coming on, and it drove me crazy. It'd been a room, and 2 or 3 seconds the lights would come on. With the Hue Bridge Native, it was really, really quick. So my journey to my combi stick was, I got started using SmartThings, and SmartThings was working well with the MQTT, and there were some delays there when I started using the Hue sensors, and I just thought, why am I using SmartThings gateway when I could just use the combi and use the REST API that's behind the scenes and the integration with Home Assistant to give me zero to latency on motion and lights coming on, which is another gateway that I've thrown out kind of in the box that will be recycled one way or another. My Vera Plus gateway sits in there too, and an old some other gateway I was using years ago that I'm reluctant. As a tinkerer, this stuff's great when you need something, you want a component or something, you just tear it down and borrow it and don't replace it. But so having moved to just combi, I've got 2 motion sensors in each room, mainly from my alarm and my old Hue sensor. They send a signal to a timer to say, right, start counting down, the room has been used, and I've got a slider to say, right, how long do you want the motion in this room? So it's anything from 1 minute to half an hour.
Okay.
And each time motion's detected, it will reset the timer back to that scale that you've provided. Trouble is, the motion sensors sometimes don't trigger from being motion to not detected to detected again quickly enough, so the lights go out. So when that timer runs out, I check to see if the motion sensor's still detected, and then it won't proceed. It just resets itself again. So effectively, it's in a constant loop until no motion's detected.
Okay.
And then it sets a second timer off, which is a 50% fade of what you've got on. So you've got a subtle clue the lights are about to go off. Wave your hands in the air if you really want them to stay on, which is nice. But I haven't had that need to wave my hands for ages. And things in the kitchen, the bath, there's other signals. So the fact that there's humidity in the bathroom, there's the shower's in use, the bath's in use, that's another signal to say, hey, don't transition to being off. In the kitchen, there's contact sensor on my fridge. You've got one on your dishwasher, Phil. They're all really useful signals to say a room is being used and don't do something.
And I think that's the power of having everything, talking to each other, right? Like when you've got these silos of apps and integrations that don't communicate with one or another, you can't get to this level of powerful information sharing and automation. So this is where, I think Home Assistant really, and other, open source products as well, but when you have so much integrations, it's, where you can really do some cool stuff.
Yeah.
And it's the data too, right?
Oh,
So
for sure.
having all those integrations, I wouldn't be able to have got to the point where I knew there's a difference between a shower and the bath if it wasn't for the data that then produced me the graph to say, look at the spikes and there's a clear difference.
No, agreed. So how many people are in your smart home? Because it sounds like there's been quite a bit of adjusting for you to figure all these numbers out and stuff. So how many people that use all this stuff?
So there's 2.5. So I separated from my daughter's mother 2 years ago, and moved into a rental. And I'm with Phil, I think, on this one, where I've had to be careful what I do, but everything I do, I can put back to normal one way or another when I do move. So my daughter spends time with me in the week, weeknights sometimes, but most weekends. So I've done some really nice automations around when I have Florence over. I'm able to turn things on in her room. She's got a lovely lava lamp and some fairy lights and some cool WLED stuff with a piece of driftwood. That's all off until she's with me I've got a calendar integration, and I keep my calendar pretty solid. So I mark when she's staying with me and not. So that triggers on the day of that event starting. It triggers an actionable alert to say, "You've planned to have Florence. Is this correct?"
Yeah.
And then it marks
nice.
her as sort of coming over, and she's in residence, if you like. And then different automation will occur throughout the day. So obviously at night, she's got a pressure pad, an old mat pressure pad thing that's under a mattress, and that detects when she's in bed for a period. And then if it's over a certain time interval, then it's nighttime. So her playlist comes on, lava lamps are on, and her WLED in a room does some effects until I think 30 minutes, and then it fades to a night mode and then off, which is really
nice.
really cool.
Yeah, that is really cool.
So how did you go about designing that sort of automation? Did she request these features, or did you sort of watch how she was interacting with the home and then come up with the automations around her?
A bit of both. So I think we're all creatures of routine and comfort. I work from home a hell of a lot, so my day can be quite weird. I wake up in the middle of the night and I'll get working, and some days I'll be away and some days I'm not. So it's hard to build schedules and routine into that. But through different things and signals and triggers, you can identify what kind of routine you might be in. So for her, it all starts with, is she over or not? So whilst I have her most weekends and an odd night or two in the week, that's not always the case. So I can't just assume that it's the weekend, so the state of a switch or something is on and Florence is here.
Right.
Which is why I love that actionable alert. I can also use my Echo to say she's over, and then that will turn it on as well. If I've not got it in my diary, for example, that ad hoc moments. But say with Christmas, I love the community, and I just saw everyone this year just went nuts for WLED, and I'd come across it previously, never really thought to try anything out, and this Christmas I thought, right, Christmas tree, WLED. So I got the components for that, and we put the Christmas tree lights up, and sadly when it was all coming down, she was like, "Can we keep the lights up, Daddy? Can we do something with those?" And I was like,
Yeah.
"Let me think about it. Let's put them in the box, and I'll do something with them when we've got a nice idea." And a couple of years back, we were on the beach, and we found a piece of driftwood and picked it up, took it home, cut it in half, and turned it into a big F for Florence. And it's huge. She was tiny at the time. It was bigger than her. And then we stuck shells on it. It was a nice piece of art on the wall, pretty unique for her. And at bedtime, I've just been thinking, what can I do with those lights when I'm reading a book and putting her to bed and stuff? And it just clicked. I've got to do something with the driftwood. So I spent an evening with the strip lights, gluing them to the back, around the side, and I tried 2 or 3 different positions for the lights, and eventually found one that really worked. And the hue glow around the driftwood was just incredible. So she's got that, and it tends to go on to different her favourite effects. But then I've got an IKEA dimmer switch. And I use that just to cycle through all the WLED effects in a room, so she can choose what's on. And then I store that in a select menu so that it can restore the effect that she's chosen. And the same in every room. I've got different scenes. I've stored those scenes in a menu, so you can set subtle lights or red lights, whatever effect you want based on the scenes you've created, and then you can cycle through them on the remote. And then when the motion triggers, it restores to that scene, so it's not disruptive. So the motion has a bit of intelligence to it, so that it doesn't just reset your room back to bright lights if you were in sort of a dimmed mode.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually really smart.
Yeah, I that's certainly something I want to share, because I think it's taken me a while to get it. Get it so solid. But Florence is a good inspiration, and it's fun to do the projects with her. So she's programmed her own ESP32 chip, and we put some lights under the bed to sync with the driftwood now. So she's got a little den under her bed, and they're all in sync. And she helped me with that, which was nice to see her learning that kind of stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah, good for her. That's amazing.
And do you do all the soldering? And I'm guessing there's a whole bunch of, I'm guessing using like ESP Home, you get the WLEDs and all that. Are you doing all the electronics yourself?
Yeah. So I love, yes, I do, yeah. So big tinkerer with that kind of stuff, and I love the ESP boards, and ESP Home's fantastic. So the pressure sensor thing that I got, it's basically a mat that should go under an entrance to a shop, and when you enter the shop, it rings a bell. So it's kind of built for security, and maybe even for elderly and frail people, or people with some kind of disability that needs monitoring based on them sitting down or something. So I just basically hijacked that rather than connect it to the alarm panel that comes with it. I plugged it into a Sonoff Basic and used the pins to alert me that the pad was pressurized or not based on the weight. The thing with that is it's got a relay and it clicks, and if it's under the bed or under the sofa or wherever it is, it's annoying. But I also don't like the whole high voltage of it, and I know it's covered and it's protected. I just thought that was a bit of an overkill for the application that I was using it for. So that's when I really started getting into ESP Home, and I've just whipped it out and replaced it with an ESP Home board with a couple of delayed pins on it so that I can detect whether there's presence there or not.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm guessing that's how you've done your little smart sofa that I saw on your Twitter account too.
Yeah. Everyone says, why do you need that? And it's just one of those signals, right? When you're sitting down, I've got Philips Ambilight TV, so it's got the hue strip light built into the TV.
Yeah.
And then that syncs to the room lights as well. And there's different times when you want it to sync. Like when my Xbox is on, I want it in complete sync. So when you're driving or shooting around, all the peripheral lights in the room are in sync with your gameplay or your movie. And there's times when you don't want that on. And if you're up and down, sometimes sit down for 15 minutes and up again. It helps with things like sticking the TV on pause, just subtle stuff that we just... I might be cooking and watching something with my daughter or whatever, and I need to run and get the dinner sorted or something, and it will stop. And it's got different applications. I just thought it was a bit of fun too. So
that's interesting. So how are you controlling the TV? So I've tried to do automatic pausing and all that. For example, when my Amazon Echo timer goes off, I would love to have the TV pause if the TV is playing. The one thing I've had trouble with is issuing the pause command via a Harmony integration is easy, right? Because you can actually pin which button on the remote to press. So you just press the pause button. The tricky bit is knowing if the TV is already paused, because if you hit the pause button again, it starts playing. And so I've found that more times than it's actually been useful is that we'll already have the TV paused for whatever reason, and the timer goes off, and then the thing starts playing and doing the absolute opposite of what it was designed to do. So do you experience that as well, or have you got a workaround for that?
I don't know. So I have encountered that, and I've got there's a couple of integrations I'm using for my TV which help. At the moment, I'm in the same position with my Harmony, just toggling between pause, and hopefully it will get the right one. There is a JS component for the Philips, which I'm looking at the moment, and talks to the API on the TV to do that kind of stuff. Because I've got the Ambilight integration, so I can turn on the Ambilight and whether it syncs with the room through that integration. It's a custom component I've put on, and that gives me some control over the TV too, so I can change the source and stuff. And I'm going to head down that route because it's from looking at the data, it's pretty solid whether the TV is paused or not. And I also use Android notification on the TV too, so that's one thing I liked about the smart things was the integration it had with its ecosystem. So you could have smart things on the telly, and I never got round to any of that. And I saw the ads and was quite blown away with it. But I love getting the notification on the TV just to say the washing machine's finished or something, and just a little trigger to go and do some chores or something. Yeah,
that's why I went with LG, the WebOS. I found that had a pretty solid integration with Home Assistant as well. And I thought, because when we were in the market for a new TV, I was like, well, what is one of the best ones that integrates?
Got to buy one with an integration,
right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What do you use your Harmony remote for? I found mine pretty redundant these days because I'm running an Apple TV and my Xbox, and I don't use anything native on the TV. The TV OS is redundant to me. I don't even have a TV antenna plugged into my telly. It's all like online feeds and stuff these days.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So I have a Sonos play bar connected to the TV, and for whatever reason it won't. So when that controls the volume of the sound, my LG TV's remote can't control the volume on the Sonos play bar. So you would need to, somehow be able to control the volume on the play bar. So that's where the Harmony comes in. I'm a big fan of the Harmony, the concept of activities, and I think, I try to make the house as guest friendly as possible. And just having the button, I want to watch Netflix, and it goes and it turns on the TV and it puts on the right app. There's no having to scroll through the apps and yourself. It just goes to what it's supposed to. So for me, I think the activities as well, it's brilliant. Yeah,
same. I use those all the time, right? So in my basement TV, that's it's hooked up with exactly that. So you say turn on the TV, it'll turn on the Apple TV, set the right channel, so on and so forth, right? So set
same
the right
problem
HDMI
with the pause, right? Though, so that's still assuming down, right, left, up, isn't it? Mm-hmm. As kind of like macros for the cursor, right?
I mean, actually, I'm not sure exactly with the Apple TV how that works. It might I think it just sends because it's a common play pause button, right?
Yep.
So it might just send that command. I'm not sure.
Oh, cool.
But
it's funny how we select our hardware now for prime integration with Home Assistant.
No, it's true. It's true.
It also, I think, is a good way for checking for potential future problems. And we've always had the cloud issues. And I think Home Assistant is really trying to make it more obvious. What a good integration looks like. They're starting to bring out like their level of standard integrations. I think they've got platinum, gold, and silver, sort of those levels, and hopefully they'll start to expose that more to people. But being able to see, all right, this integration is local, all right, that's great. If it's going through the cloud though, it might sort of, all right, yes, it integrates with Home Assistant, but it's a cloud connection, so there is a potential that it could go away in the future that might hesitate someone from wanting to buy that. So
Yeah. That was one of the big reasons why I dumped SmartThings. I was not going to expose anything. And my network's pretty solid, and I've got the typical VLAN separating stuff. And the thought of having to do that was just something I just wasn't happy doing. So I dumped that, and the reliance on I was running a Docker to do the broker in between SmartThings and Home Assistant for MQTT, and there was too many pieces being added to make that all work, and I wasn't happy with the amount of dependencies needed. And
one link in the chain breaks, and it's all tears, right?
Yeah, well, it's exactly it. I mean, I had the exact same problem, James, which is why that was actually when the native integration to SmartThings came in. That's why I was a lot happier, but it's still just another thing, right? If that makes any sense. So, trying to simplify that down too. So I've
still got some dependencies, like I'm sure you guys are running some form of MQTT, but I'm really less reliant on tons of sort of flows for integration, and I've got decons for Combi and my Combi stick and stuff. But there's less troubleshooting when there's not three things involved, and I know there's always going to be a need for a few extra systems to run what we're running. But I want it to be a hobby. I don't want it to be a nightmare and breaking and troubleshooting it constantly. I want to do cool stuff like I've done with some of the integration and automation with, say, Florence's room and stuff.
So I would like to know, so you've obviously got the Amazon Echo for your voice control, and you've got a whole bunch of motion sensors. Have you done anything with running tablets around the house as an interface into Home Assistant, or have you sort of got to the point where you don't really need to touch the interface and the things just work?
So yes and no. So I'd like that still. I wanted my house to be a smart home in the sense that I didn't need reliance on an app or a tablet or even voice. I wanted it just to do stuff in the simplest way possible. If you look at my my panel UI in Home Assistant is a horrible mess, mainly because I focused on getting all the integrations and automation solid before I start looking at the presentation layer. And UX is a big part of work, and making things accessible and inclusive by design is really key. And I wanted to concentrate on the getting the automations rock solid before I start caring about what I show you on a panel and in a page, or however I go about that. But it's on the cards for sure. I've got some real cool data to show it through Grafana and stuff, which I'll do. I still don't know what tablet to chuck it on, and whether I want to go down the tablet route at all. I'm quite happy with voice, and I've got a Stream Deck on my desk, which I've linked to do some stuff with Home Assistant if I really want some quick actions or scenes. So the Stream Deck just sends the API call over to Home Assistant to trigger a script or whatever. That's quite neat. When I lock my workstation, I've got a scheduled task that calls the API to turn my desk lights off. When I unlock my workstation, the reverse, and that's nice. It just keeps a bit of energy down, and no point running the lights and for the sake of it.
That's cool. So it just like does a bash script or something, or the Windows equivalent to tell Home Assistant?
There's a PowerShell module somebody's got on GitHub that I pulled down, and that you put in the token, it creates a session, and then you basically provide the domain, the service, and the entity and the state if you want to go down that route. In one commandlet, which is really nice, and I'm using that for Stream Deck and the scheduled tasks. So rather than turn a scene on, I turn a switch on to say I'm at my desk, and then I can use that in automations for other things, like if the temperature gets too warm, I can turn my fan on. But I only do that if I'm at my desk. There's no point turning my fan on if I'm not at my desk. Yeah, so
I found to get around that, I've got a power monitor on my monitor for my computer. So if the computer monitor's on, what the computer's on, then I'm obviously at the desk, and then it turns on that mode. So my study lamp will turn on. If it's hot, same thing. The fan will turn on, or if it's cold, the heater will turn on. And then I just get into the habit of, when I'm not at the desk anymore, I just turn the monitor off, or eventually if I unplug the laptop, it'll turn the monitor off anyway. And that's like a presence sensor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I probably will end up going down and using I think I've got a Sonos energy module that is surplus for requirements, but so far it's working all right, and my Windows machine turns the monitor off after 15 minutes, so we're pretty tight with locking our workstation, so it's either locked or the monitor is off, so nice.
So what sort of presence detection have you got happening in your home? I know you said you're using calendars for when your daughter's over, but what about for yourself?
So calendars is cool. So I've got a couple of integrations there with, say, my hot tub. It turns on based on an event in my calendar, so it pre-warms it rather than it just sitting on all the time. But I have chores in that, and in terms of presence, I use the Home Assistant apps to give me geolocation data. I've got some tiles. So I love the tiles. I've got a tile stuck to the windscreen on my car. That's useful. And then the house keys. So I never leave the house without some keys. So one way or another, my car, my keys, or me. But there's those edge cases, and I think Phil, you've documented this on your blog around. You might have your car at the garage, you might forget your keys or your work bag, and so I've got a couple of states like what the house is in, and I use my Ring alarm to give me a big indication of whether I'm home or not. But that doesn't help if you've got guests over, for example, or for whatever reason you've gone thingless and you've got no device, no keys, no car, and you're just alone, if you like. So I'm still working through that. I'd love to hear what you guys do, and maybe give me some ideas how to manage that a bit better.
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, it depends too, right? Because for me, it's like I've always got my phone on me. Just again, part of my work, part of whatever. So my phone is always with me. So if that's my primary sense of presence. But then at that point, it's also, and my partner has one as well. So she's also, she's also got the Home Assistant app, whatever. And based on that is primarily how we trigger most of our stuff, in terms of whether the home is, or we are home or away or anything like that. Outside of that, I'm trying to think. There's not a ton else. The difficult one is the guest mode one, right? How do I detect if people are here?
So I've got two. I've got the Google Calendar integration. So I've got about probably 9 or 10 different. Just look at my calendar now. I've probably got 12 sensors driven from my calendar. So like whether guests are staying. I'm a big food nut, so I love cooking, and I plan like the next 7 meals in my calendar, and then I'll do my food shop based on that. And every day I get a little push notification to say, right, this is what's for dinner. And if in the description on the event in my calendar it says buy or defrost, it then gives me 2 different actionable alerts on my phone. One to buy the thing, and it will keep nudging me, have you bought it, have you bought it, have you defrosted it, have you defrosted it, until you either open the fridge or acknowledge the actionable alert. But I stick when my friends are coming over for dinner or if guests are staying, and then I do stuff like in the guest room I turn off automations that just would annoy them, and I just dumb it down a little bit because it can be a bit too much for people. Yeah,
mine more importantly for me is because a lot of times people stay over, right? Actually, a buddy of mine's actually upstairs sleeping right now, and hopefully I'm not waking him up. But it's one of those things where at night. So for me, guest mode is also around when I say goodnight and it turns off all the lights and stuff. I still want others to be able to walk around the house, do that kind of thing, right? So how do I actually make sure that it's not turning off the bathroom lights if somebody else is in the bathroom or something like that, right? So in the guest washroom. So it's a lot of that too.
Nice. Yeah, my alarm triggers a ton of night automation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think for me, I have always tried to design my presence and even, like the lights as always having a redundancy. So for example, as I mentioned before, the Philips Hue dimmer, if for whatever reason the lights in the office can't turn on, the dimmer can work without Home Assistant or the Zigbee network being up. Yep. It can turn the lights on. And I've always been conscious of that, having a phone, like I had the original Google Pixel, and one day its motherboard just decided to fry itself, and I was without a phone. Now, when I came home, of course, with my phone was just the primary source of presence, then of course the home wouldn't know who I am, and that's something that I'm conscious of, not just for myself, but also anyone else. If I have a guest over that doesn't have their phone linked to Home Assistant, how do they identify and all that? So for me, what I found was the easiest way was to use at the time was an MQTT alarm panel, which exposed a very generic alarm panel to Home Assistant. So now you can use a template alarm panel, which would be easier, so you don't need an MQTT broker. And the presence for the house is basically, it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to know who is home, except for maybe my office, where only if I'm home, would the computer turn on, like the computer monitor would turn on with motion. But that can easily be overridden with voice. So as long as the alarm panel is disarmed, then the house assumes that someone is home and it activates home mode.
Same with you.
And from there, the other points, so for example, now my phone will just disarm the alarm. And if my wife's phone will disarm the alarm, or if a guest comes over, they can just punch in a code on a tablet on a wall and it disarms the alarm, and it doesn't matter. Right. If it's a guest or if it's me, the house knows that someone is home and activates all the automations that it needs to. The tricky bit is obviously guests, and for that, it's just as simple, is a guest staying, yes or no? I think your calendar is a fantastic idea. That's probably the next level I would go to. For me, I have just an input Boolean. I have 2 places where a guest could be, either staying in our spare bedroom or in the living room on the couch. So I have 2 zones for where a guest could be staying, and if they're staying in the living room, then I just flick on the living room, there's a guest in there, and when it gets to night and the TV turns off, it sort of does its own limited automations for there.
Yeah, I would be struggling without that calendar integration for me. So I like Florence's schedules in there, school holidays and stuff. So I drive a ton of stuff from that. But it's also useful, just a quick reminder, when is the next school holiday? So that's useful data coming out of the calendar that I just haven't got to click through and go and find the next sort of holiday event, because it's presented in Home Assistant for me.
Now for stuff like that, do they publish that in like an iCal, or is that something you manually do?
So the school has a page that shares the dates, and some schools do have like a iCal file or ICS file that you can import. This school at the moment doesn't. I'd love to get them to do it, because it would probably save many hours of parents putting it in their own diaries. And then I subscribe to a couple, so I'm a big F1 fan. Six Nations is on at the moment for us, the rugby's on, so I pull sort of a few things in there that can drive scenes and lights and stuff, but they're not really massive things to sell, really. It's just another event in a calendar. But yeah, we can, when you're on holiday and stuff, is useful just to drive extended away in the house. I do have a random light generator.
You mentioned before that you're using a tile tracker, like you've got tiles on your keys and in your car. Have you linked them with the Tile app, or have you just got them broadcasting constantly to like a Raspberry Pi or something in the home?
So I at the moment they link to the app, but I was looking at the integration with VSP Home for them just to broadcast. I actually prefer them going through the app, because it gives me a few extra components that I probably wouldn't get. I can actually see the location of the tile because it syncs with the phone. So it gives me a bit more data to play with. Pretty accurate as well. Like when I park up, the alarm, I literally park outside the house, and within, I think, usually 30 seconds to a couple of minutes, the house has detected that I'm home. I've got a Unify network, so that I use for a bit of presence as well, but not anything that I'm relying on massively. And as I say, I haven't really quite got that to the point where I'm happy about how it's all hanging together, other than the calendar and the physical alarm that I have to either turn on or off through the phone or through the panel. So something to play with.
Yeah.
What about how you're hosting Home Assistant? My journey started off on a Pi, and I very quickly became frustrated with how much time I was waiting for it to reboot. And then since then, I've started using Docker a ton more on my Synology NAS, which I just love to bits, running it in there. No performance issues, reboots in, I don't know, 70, 80 seconds, maybe even less. But I know you Phil, you've moved over to running it on a NUC, haven't you?
Right? No. I'm running it. I'm actually running 3 instances of Home Assistant now. So I started on the Synology, which is a great piece of kit. And just having Docker in that NAS is amazing. And of course, when you get Docker in a NAS, you just have a whole bunch of containers. And I was running so much that Home Assistant was clearly the biggest container, but it was struggling with everything else.
Yeah.
So I had an old Nettop PC somewhere. I just installed a Linux server on that and moved over to that, and then sort of started getting constraints on that. And rather than buying another computer, I've sort of tried to split up what my Home Assistant instance does. So now the Synology is basically I use Home Assistant as a cloud gateway. So any integration that requires a cloud connection and will go offline if the cloud's not available runs from one instance of Home Assistant, and then it will push out all the entities over MQTT Discovery to all the other instances. I've then got the primary instance of Home Assistant, which runs the lights and motion and all that. And then I have another instance which is doing anything that's non-critical. So, for example, 1 a.m. every day it'll go and see, all right, what bin is coming out this week, and adjusting sensors around that. Or it might go and check, other sensors around the house and make sure everything's fine that's not critical to the lights turning off and on. So I've got maybe a bit of a complicated setup, I'm guessing now, but it sort of works for me. I just didn't want to buy another bit of hardware. I'd rather reuse what I've already got.
Sure. I've not found. So I've got. I put extended memory and a big SSD cache on my Synology. So I haven't encountered issues. So I've got 16 gigs available for usage on Docker and other resources. I think at best Home Assistant pulls 6 or 7. That's after a long cycle of it being running. And then I don't see any delays or lag with automations or lights running through decons and Docker. Not yet anyway, but I am of the view now that I'm so ingrained in this that I probably don't want it. I still probably want Docker as a container system to host it, but I might put the reliance in a separate piece of hardware and take it off the NAS for that.
Right.
It's plugged into a UPS, so the Ring alarm's got battery backup. My router A switch and my NAS are plugged into a UPS for a bit of time to shut down and close down things properly and safely.
Rohan, what are you running yours on? Because you've got at least 2 instances of Home Assistant running now, right? Because you're using the API to connect them, right?
Yeah, so I'm running it on. So my Conbi is running on a Raspberry Pi. I think it's a Raspberry Pi 3. It's not nothing fancy. And then my main instance is running on. It's just running on a VM and in Docker.
Yep.
As part of my home lab, whatever. So I've got a server there that's got all that stuff. But for the most part, it's just it's just running off of a VM and Raspberry Pi.
Okay.
Yeah,
nice.
Nothing too complicated, but again, for me, it's the augmenting of the little things, right, rather than doing everything all at once. So I do have quite a bit of stuff still, but yeah.
I had this where I've obviously trashed my Z-Wave network because I was just using it for that bath sensor, and right now the Combi, the sticker I'm using, is plugged into my NAS and running into decons in Docker. But I'm trying to get my Philips. At the moment, my bedroom and my living room lights are connected to a Hue bridge still for the Ambilight service in the TVs to work, and I'd love to get to the point where I can tear that bridge down, move the lights to Combi, and completely be running that whole network on the Combi stick with decons, and then have the TVs talk to a DIY Hue emulator, and then that accesses decons as well. But I don't know if the latency and the lag with the lights is going to work. So that's something I'm playing with at the moment and getting quite frustrated with, mainly because my TVs have updated and they won't detect any bridge now, so I can't proceed to see if it will work. I'm just waiting for that to be patched.
Right. Yeah, this is a problem, right? You start getting down this rat hole, and now it's more and more stuff.
I'm completely in bed with it.
I know.
Like if I go back to where I started, I had OpenHAB on a Raspberry Pi, and I put it in a picture frame, and it was on the wall, just flashing away, doing its thing, and it had a couple of sensors in the frame, which would mainly drive that projector blind integration I was talking about. But now it's virtualized and hiding away, and just the thought of the 6-7 years that I've been doing this, from that Raspberry Pi in that frame that's still above my desk as an ornament, like to run in what we run now is just crazy. And I think the hardware is so much better these days. The service, like Home Assistant, it rocks. And then you've got the community. I think just how that's grown, you share something and people go nuts for it these days, and I'm really grateful for what you guys do and what the community provides. I know a lot of people put a lot of time in making these videos and articles, and I've countless. I do think we need to make sure we read stuff, because I think the Home Assistant documentation is there. It's great to get going with, and I can't fault it. But you see some people's problems are just maybe asking a little bit too soon, but I think everyone around the community is there to help, and we do our best to do what we do. So thanks everyone for your help. I just got to work out a medium to share my stuff. I don't know whether go down the blog route or videos or what, but I feel I've got a lot of content that, by the sounds of it, people want to hear and understand and learn from.
Yeah, and let us know when you do.
A lot of cool stuff. Yeah, so where can people find you? We'll leave links to your Twitter, of course, in the show notes. Have you got anywhere else that people can follow you on?
Yeah, so I think my blog, so I've got jcallahan.com, it's full of my tech work. So I work as a Microsoft 365 consultant in the UK for Microsoft. So a lot of my articles are related to that theme, food, and I've got a backlog. So I use Azure DevOps to track all of my work items for my home. I put bugs in there and I can track it down to the code, which is really cool. Like when you're in DevOps all day anyway, I just felt a natural place to put my backlog. And then I've got a huge list of posts, probably 30 plus articles that I want to share, problems I've had. It's just picking the right ones to share that are relevant and of value, and not just repeating what others have done. But I don't know. I like to write, so yeah, definitely check my blog out. Twitter, I'm always posting, and that's, I think, how I've met you two, really. And then the community I dip in and out of. There's some Facebook groups I'm in. I try and contribute here and there. But I don't know. I don't know whether to break into YouTube or what really for this format. I'll maybe put it out to the audience. Let me know how you think you might want me to share some stuff.
There you go.
Any suggestions from you two?
I always appreciate. I've always thought that blogging is a great medium for, not everyone can watch a video, and being able to give code examples as well as the reasoning behind the code examples can sort of help someone, as opposed to just force feeding, here's the code, do it sort of thing. Like, this is how I've done it, now you do it. So it's sort of a bridge between a GitHub repo and a tutorial, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I agree with that too. But in that same breath, I've also been terrible at updating my blog. So
totally. Since doing this podcast, we have had no time to do our own blogs.
I know it's so bad.
No, I completely understand with that, and the articles that you do share, I'm really grateful for. Like, I'm running your washing machine integration, well, your automation for that, and don't have a dishwasher sadly, but I'd chuck it onto that too. But your articles, both of you, when I've read stuff, it's solid. So hopefully I can meet you there on content and quality there when I start writing. But it's hard, right? Running a family, running a home automation, running a job. It's definitely hard to keep it going. And I've been running my blog for a decade or so, and it's invaluable for what it's given me. The experience, the people reading it, it's so valuable. So I think I'll probably go down that route.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
Well, James, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all your cool stuff. We'll have links everywhere in the show notes. But yeah, take care, and we'll speak to you soon, hopefully.
Thanks so much, Bev. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
If you want to share your Home Assistant journey or come on as a guest, reach out to us at feedback@hasspodcast.io. That's HASS podcast.io.
The Home Assistant podcast is hosted by Phil Hawthorne and myself, Rohan Karamandi. For links to topics that we discussed today, check out our show notes on hasspodcast.io.